And our next question on that issue comes from Cal Brink from the Marshall Chamber. Cal?
Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you for allowing me to ask a question. As he mentioned, Cal Brink from the Marshall Chamber, EDA, and CVB, the Executive Director. First of all, I'd like to thank Governor Dayton for the comments he made on transportation and kind of bringing that to the forefront. The question tonight is, we know that transportation funding and the gap in that funding will be probably very bright on the radar screen. What respective ideas would your caucuses have for solutions and ways to solve the problems on transportation funding?
All right, thank you very much for the question, Cal. Senator Bach, let me start with you. We've heard just about everybody say they agree it's a major problem and it's going to take a major solution, which is going to require major funding. Where's that going to come from?
Well, I can tell you, back in 2013, the Senate passed a very comprehensive transportation package that included new revenue. Included new revenue for transit, included new revenue for roads and bridges and trunk highways. We stand ready in the Senate to work with the business community. We think ignoring this is at the peril of our business community, because as it gets more congestion and the cost of moving goods and services around, you all in this room are going to pay the price for that in lost productivity. And this system is not going to fix itself. I can tell you the Senate is ready to consider any new proposals that put some additional revenue into this system. We're all for efficiencies, and I know Commissioner Zelli's been doing a good job identifying them, but by itself, it's not going to be enough to solve the problem. So the Senate will have a bill that's going to increase revenue into the system.
Will it include a gas tax increase?
I don't know yet if it'll be a gas tax or something along the gross receipts line, but certainly...
Will you know by 9 a.m. tomorrow when you have a news conference? No. Okay.
No.
Just trying to prepare for my day tomorrow, so now I know. In the House, what would Democrats support? We talked on the House floor yesterday. It's kind of Republicans driving the bus there now, but what would you like to see out of a package that you will likely have to work in concert with Republicans on?
Yeah, well, I fundamentally agree with what Governor Dayton said, is we need we know the scope of the problem, we know the size of the problem, maybe we can have some discussions about that, but we need some real solutions. Certainly there will be support among House Democrats. You know, I don't know how much, but for an increase in some form of a fuel tax and some other revenue, you know, some additional revenue coming into the system. You know, we're open to talking about new ideas, but I think it's important, a couple things, just to look back at the last 2 years, because there's been a lot of discussion, and this is the other point I think is important. It's important that we include transit as part of this package. In the last 2 years, we put $600 million into roads in this state. We put $15 million new dollars into transit. And it seems from the rhetoric you hear that we're doing the opposite, that we're putting $600 million into transit and $15 million into roads. The reality is we got to understand what we've been doing and how much is actually going into roads and bridges in this state. It's also important from a statewide perspective. You know, I was in St. Cloud a couple of months ago. They just won a national award for their transit system. Transit's not a metropolitan issue. When we're talking about serving greater Minnesota, and we're talking about serving the whole state, transit is a fundamental part of that, and it's going to be more and more important as this society ages and greater Minnesota ages, because as you age, as you know, people aren't going to be able to get in the car and drive. So we need those options out there. So there will be support among us. The other thing I just want to touch on, for people that, like Jeff Johnson, when he was talking about bonding for highways, we can't do it today. You can't issue general obligation bonds for our state highways. It doesn't work, it's illegal, and we have no money in our system to actually finance trunk highway bonds. So anybody that thinks bonding is an answer, borrowing money is an answer here, unless we actually solve the revenue problem, it's a non-starter.
Now, Speaker Dowd, obviously you'll be a bit at odds with the Democrats in the House because you've talked about a vigorous focus on roads and bridges and less so on transit. Is that what you are likely to propose? And will we see some of that as early as tomorrow?
Absolutely. I think that we need to remember that something like 97% of Minnesotans use our road and bridge infrastructure as their primary mode of transportation. And unfortunately, we're not taking care of the basics before we're biting off more than we can chew on the extras. And we've taken money from Minnesotans to pay for those basics. We've spent too much of it on extras, and now we're going to go back to Minnesotans and ask them for more money to pay for the basics? Doesn't make logical sense. And I think there's...
What does that mean, though? What can you explain a little bit more? You mean taking money from health and human services and education and nursing homes and
We're gonna
people with
have-
disabilities
we're gonna
to
have-
pay for the roads and bridges? I mean, you talk in generalities. Let's hear actually some specifics. You can talk about efficiencies. You can talk about taking money from the general fund. It's not a long-term solution, Kurt. So let's hear what your real solution is.
In a minute here, they're going to lower the cage, and we're going to take our sport coats off.
Well, and I was hoping he was going to do the dramatic turn to the camera, but
Yeah, right.
It's
No,
a
no,
work in progress.
and I absolutely appreciate that. What we have to remember, though, is that when we take more money out of Minnesota families' pockets, it hurts them, and we end up with diminished returns on our tax revenue. Okay, it's funny how people talk from the last revenue forecast about how we might have an improved revenue forecast the next time around because gas prices are low. Why? Because we left more money in Minnesota families' pockets, and they went out and spent it in your businesses, and they paid sales tax, and we're going to have a bump in receipts. Okay? What we need to do is figure out how to put more money into their pockets. And what we may need to do in the short term is figure out how to put an influx of money into transportation. And we may not be able to solve this on a long-term basis, but we've got some money left in the bottom line. And I think we could pay off some of those trunk bonds and free up some more bonding capacity to get through this. And we could put $500 million into roads and bridges right now.
So, yes.
And that's something that puts real money into our roads and bridges without hurting Minnesota families. And I think that's the thing that we should look at before we go right back to the cash register and hurt Minnesota families, hurt your businesses, and not allow you to grow and hire more folks.
So yes or no to a gas tax increase, whether it's per gallon, wholesale tax, whatever you want to call it.
Tom, I've been really honest with everybody saying that everything's on the table and we're going to consider everything. You're going to have a tough time with this one, convincing me that this is the best solution for Minnesota.
Senator Hand, a lot of people say that transportation, just like education, is kind of a basic service in Minnesota. Why don't we fund it like education out of the general fund? Is that unrealistic?
It's not unrealistic. I think we should look at putting a general fund commitment to transportation. But one thing I will say is our caucus is not ready to raise another tax, and we shouldn't. We just had $2.5 billion of tax increases last year. We've got one of the highest tax rates for corporate and income tax and, frankly, gas tax in this state, around the country. We don't need another tax. I think we have to look at what we're spending money on, and can we reprioritize what we're doing? Everything can't be a top priority. I think transportation is a big priority, but you're not going to solve that by adding another tax onto the system.
All right, we're running
Tom,
short on
can
time.
I add one more thing?
You got 15 seconds.
You know, the other thing that I think people need to know is the gross receipts tax. This is something that's going to hit Minnesota family pockets just the same. If you raise it 6.5 cents, gas is going to be 6.5 cents higher at the pump. And the only reason to do it is so you can spend the money on transit instead of on roads and bridges, because a regular gas tax is dedicated to roads and bridges. And I don't think either one of them is a good solution.
All right.